Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sir Hunt on X on this 13th of October of the calendar year 2025. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day and a wonderful 3-day weekend. Interesting day among the Bengals fan base. I think everybody's seen what happened, but I'm not going to touch on it. I've already moved on from it because we have people in our fan base who carry themselves like the biggest bunch of cowards walking God's green earth. But don't worry, I'll be there Thursday night, so too will my show, and I'll be the same way, whether you guys like it or not. Now I got that out of the way. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful weekend. Happy Victory Monday to the victories teams of last night and yesterday. Lots to get to, obviously. I was going to get right down to it for the Week 6 recap. Those of you new here, I just briefly touch on each game, good, bad, one storyline from each side, and I just move on to the next game. Now, to start with a good doozy that took place in Indiana between the Colts and the Cardinals. Kyler Murray out of the game for Jacoby Brissett, who filled in admirably, did the best he could. But it was Daniel Jones showing why he was the rightful starter for the Indianapolis Colts, winning once again, utilizing all of his targets. And right now, with Jonathan Taylor as an unstoppable force as a running back, and you have, of course, Jones doing what he's doing at the quarterback position once he was named a starter. It's turned out to be success for the Indianapolis Colts, and they continue to roll. For Arizona, of course, who knows what's going to happen with Kyler Murray. But I said all along before the season started, it's do or die for Kyler Murray. I mean, and the Arizona Cardinals. They thought they bounced back nicely after how embarrassingly bad they looked and the way they blew that 15-point lead at Tennessee. They came back and played rather admirably, but the Colts defense held serve on the final play of the game, and they moved on. But what happens with Arizona moving forward, especially Kyler Murray, is a big question mark, because it's probably about closing in on time to see whether he's the guy or not. And right now, he's on the bubble, and he didn't look all that great last week. Of course, he got knocked out of the game yesterday, and Jacoby Brissett did the job. But it was a nice win for Indy. We're going to find out what Kyler Murray's made of going forward. And basically, it's time for Arizona to think about other options when we talk about the quarterback position if Kyler Murray's just going to be the way he's been over the last couple of years. Of course, up in New Orleans, it was the Patriots over the Saints. Drake, right now, if you have a new top 10 list of quarterbacks in the NFL, add Drake May to it. He's just killing it right now. What more do you have to say? You're talking about throwing 261 yards, a touchdown passes to guys like Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas. And basically, the Patriots are going to be a serious contender, proving that the hire of Mike Vrabel was the answer to everything, because he's basically taken this team and just implemented almost like a Belichickian type of way. And we have the talent that they have on their roster, especially at the quarterback position, especially in the AFC, where basically below them, it's not really much. They're a real life dog to clinch a playoff spot at this rate. I won't go as far as, winning the AFC East, because there's still that guy in Buffalo named Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills who have something to say about that. But they're trending in the right direction. They're playing well on both sides of the ball. And right now, Drake May has ascended to a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And for the Saints, long season. You got your one win against a Giants team who basically handed it to you with 5 turnovers on 5 straight possessions. But that's still going to be a long season, and you have holes all over the place that need to be taken care of. And of course, in Pittsburgh, there was the Steelers just beating up on the Browns, and I mean beating up on the Browns. Game wasn't as close as the score was. The reason why it was much is because after the touchdowns, Pittsburgh the defense just shut down this offense, and that's what they did. Question I have is, who was the wise guy who thought Dylan Gabriel could throw the ball 52 times? That played right into the hands of the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And somebody in Cleveland has some explaining to do. He wasn't bad against Minnesota. He wasn't good or yesterday either. But his idea was to scheme up 52 pass plays for Dylan Gabriel. Needs to have their head examined, because he's not that kind of a quarterback, and you don't do that to a rookie quarterback. Now, we talk about the Pittsburgh side of things. Aaron Rodgers played well. The defense, of course, did their job. And of course, the storyline came this today. We're talking about the between these two teams, how the press conference earlier today with Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin throwing shade at Andrew Berry, the general manager. It was talking about the trade between the Ravens, the Browns and the Bengals for Joe Flacco, and among many other things. Basically saying it's something he wouldn't do within the division. Of course, Bengals and Browns fans are spinning it off in their own weird, moronic ways. But can't say Mike Tomlin is not wrong, because we know Andrew Berry does a crappiest job when it comes to quarterback stability. Because we know what he did 3 years ago in the trade with Houston Texans, getting Deshaun Watson for all that draft capital, which has been egg on their face. On top of that, the idiotic $230 million guaranteed contract. So that's what you had when you talk about this that. But we talk about yesterday, Steelers defense has shut down the Browns offense, which really wasn't really much. We think about the fact that someone was stupid enough to think that back up. Someone was stupid enough to think Dillon Gabriel was good enough to be a 52-yard 52 pass attempt quarterback, which is just a terrible thing. And whoever's idea that was, they need to be checked. So that's what we have with that good win by Pittsburgh. And it's the top of the AFC North. Right now, they have to be the favorites because the rest of the AFC North is just an absolute trip to the gutter of the trash bin, because the other three teams right now, lots of questions have to be answered. See if I can figure it out. We can figure it out down the line. Of course, a bit of a stunner yesterday was Carolina over Dallas, but maybe this is who Dallas is at the end of the day. I mean, 1 week they'll look so good that the next week they're going to let you down. It's largely because that defense once again rears its ugly head, allowing Rico Dwaddle to have another field day on, like he did last week, having it on Miami. He did it again this week. I mean, the Cowboys had a chance to show something, didn't. Basically, Dwaddle went for 183 yards in the fourth quarter alone against the Dallas defense. Should tell you just how bad the Dallas defense was. I mean, they played offensively well, but of course, defensively, I mean, there was nowhere to be seen. I mean, they made Rico Dwaddle look like Barry Sanders. That's how bad that defense was for the Dallas Cowboys. And that's how it's going to probably be all year long. Unfortunate, because Dak Prescott's rebounded nicely. That's how that goes over there in Big D. But we know what the story with all of that is. So Dallas, right now, coming off the tie against Green Bay and the slaughtering of the Jets, lay an egg in Carolina. 2 weeks after Carolina was just goose egg. Carolina last week, some way, somehow, pulled one out of the butt against Miami. Dallas had a chance to take this one, couldn't, and we got what we got at the end. So good win for Carolina, bad loss for Dallas, who might not be a playoff team after all. In the tough NFC East, and we know how tough that division is with Philly and Washington. And oh, by the way, the Giants, after what they did to the Eagles Thursday night, they're going to be a problem too. Now we go overseas, of course, it's the Broncos and the Jets. The Broncos defense showed up for the first time this season. I mean, they just beat up Justin Fields and that offense. Granted, it's a Jets offense. I get it. But the Broncos defense wasn't like this any point this season. And they just beat up Justin Fields and that offense to the tune of 9 sacks. And Nick Bonito, who got that big contract earlier in the year, played like it. Patrick Surtain put the clamps on Garrett Wilson. And it was the Denver defense just putting the lockdown on the Jets offense to get the win overseas. Might be the win that gets them going a little bit. Now, the good thing for them is next 2 to 3 games, schedule gets a little soft before a huge Sunday night till some point next month at Kansas City, which is going to light up everything, especially given what's about to happen to Kansas here soon. But the Broncos got the win. Of course, they didn't look pretty doing it. But when you're overseas, you're playing a defensive struggle, you just got to muck it up. And that's what the Denver Broncos defense did. Granted, as I said, they're playing the Jets offense, and we know how bad that is. But the Broncos defense hadn't looked that good until when they went to London. Big win overseas for the Broncos. And maybe the game of the day yesterday was in Miami. Chargers over the Dolphins. The story here, Miami, they're just falling off. Okay. If they were hanging on a cliff, they might have just fallen off the cliff. I've actually rumored now that Stephen Ross, the owner, was over there with the team as they went back to the locker room. And we talk about that particular instant. It's not a good look when you have the owner with your team and he's going with you guys to the locker room. That's not a sign of good things to come. I think everybody knows Mike McDaniel, the head coach, is on borrowed time. And it might not matter if, but no matter when, the guy gets the can over there in Miami. The sooner, the better, more than likely. But then again, who are they going to replace him with? Because the makeup of this roster is just absolutely abysmal, especially when you have Tyreek Hill out for the season. One real good story, though, is, of course, the continued resurgence of Darren Waller after being out of the NFL. Caught the go-ahead touchdown. Looked like they had the game under control, but the defense just crapped the bed, and Justin Herbert just drove them down for the game-winning field goal as time expired. Good road win for the Chargers, trying to, after how bad they looked last week against Washington when they got the clamps put on them, found a way to get the job done, albeit against a Miami team that's fallen off the rails. But they did get a much-needed win to stay afloat the AFC West, because we know who's coming down the line over the next several weeks. And it's LA over Baltimore. Nothing much to say here. Baltimore's defense played a little better, but once again, the problems lying with the offense. Granted, no Lamar Jackson, but maybe bringing back Lamar Jackson isn't going to be the end-all be-all for the Baltimore Ravens turning this thing around, because the offense was just absolutely atrocious every single which way, especially on the goal line, where you basically have no creativity, try to punt it down the middle with Derrick Henry, and he couldn't break 1 yard to get a touchdown. So the issues more likely run deeper for the Baltimore Ravens than just Lamar Jackson on the sideline. I mean, Lamar Jackson's going to come back and probably cover a lot of stuff. But is it going to be a case of too little, too late? We'll find out. That defense needs to find a way to fix itself. Granted, they made the trade over the before the game, and of course they're talking about Lamar Jackson, being back after the bye, but not sure that's going to be the answer, because a lot of problems in Baltimore. If they're going to at least try to get into the playoffs, which is still doable because their schedule after their bye is real soft, lots of work need to be done. It really does. Granted, they made the trade for the safety. I can't remember his name. The defense looked a little better, but also, of course, Puka Nacua was knocked out of the game, so that didn't help matters for the LA Rams. But they did get the road win. Byron Young basically was just a men amongst boys on the Rams defensive front with 2 of his 4 sacks. Big win for LA. Now to the late slate, the Raiders over the Titans. Of course, we know what happened to Tennessee today, the firing of Brian Callahan, which I thought should have happened before the season started, because we know how abysmally bad Tennessee was last season. Granted, the roster had bought nothing on the roster. I hate to see a coach being fired, but Brian Callahan, somebody had to take the axe for how bad Tennessee has been over the last few years. Which I say the biggest mistake the Titans made, the downfall began when they dealt A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles, and the wheels fell off after that. It was eventually Ryan Tannehill showed out the door. General manager John Robinson was gone. Eventually, Derrick Henry left. A couple pieces on the defensive front. And eventually, Mike Vrabel was shown the door. They brought in Brian Callahan. That didn't work. He was shown the door. What cracks me up is we have these short-term turnarounds in the NFL where basically 1 or 2 years, you don't generate results, you're out the door. I'm appalled how many front offices have that kind of patience. I mean, you're not going to have a 1 year, unless you have stockpile draft picks and do what the Rams did when they won the Super Bowl back in 2021 over Cincinnati. Unless you have that kind of roster, 2 years is not going to get it done. And it's pretty much, we consider the rebuilding phase Tennessee is in, given after what happened in the 2021 playoff loss to Cincinnati. And that basically been in the rebuild mode and retooling mode ever since it has backfired. Patience is run thin. I mean, you drafted Cam Ward number 1 overall. That's not going to be your answer in a minute. I mean, no one was going to pay Tennessee to win the AFC South at the very least. But it's interesting why people would general managers would resort to this kind of a firing that took place, because that's what happened. I mean, that's what we got here. Now, for the Raiders, Max Crosby was still Max Crosby, showing why he's one of the premier defensive players in the league. Not necessarily great job by the offensive front. But congratulations, the Raiders. Your gift this coming Sunday is a red-hot Kansas City team who's going to bring one of its premier weapons, Rashid Rice, back. And you're fixing to be a victim of a slaughtering that's going to take place at Arrowhead this coming Sunday, which I'll touch on that in my previews in a couple of days. But Raiders did get the win, managed to stay afloat. And it's the Buccaneers over the 49ers. I'm not a prognosticator of giving MVPs after 6 weeks, but if I had to vote today, it would be Baker Mayfield, and it's a no-brainer. I mean, what he's done. And now you're talking about not having Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Bucky Irving, who was out, and you lost Emeka Egbuka for the game, and you still found a way to win a game against a San Francisco team who had played pretty well. And that's what I'll tell you about what's happened to Baker Mayfield since he went to Tampa. And it started, you can probably say it started in his brief tenure with the Rams when Sean McVay started to build confidence. He basically went to Tampa on a one-year flyer after Tom Brady retired. And from that point forward, especially that playoff win against Philly, he's taken off. His confidence has taken off. And he's ascended to a top 10 quarterback right now himself in the NFL. You can probably say right now, after 6 weeks, probably the favorite to win the MVP. Now, there's a guy in Kansas City named Patrick Mahomes who's going to have something to say about that at the end of the year. But for right now, we're talking about after 6 games, Baker Mayfield is the MVP. I mean, you got to give him his due. 4 of his 5 wins are game-winning drives. That's a clutch gene. That should tell you what's going on. Too bad those people in Northeastern Ohio and Cleveland didn't appreciate or admire what this guy did when he got into that playoff win in Pittsburgh that year, because they wanted him out the door so bad. And why? People haven't answered that up there in Northeastern Ohio. But for San Francisco, Godspeed, Fred Warner. That's just terrible what happened to you. Just another injury bug to what's been another injury-riddled season for the San Francisco 49ers. Of course, we know the injuries that decimated them last season, and it doesn't help this season when you talk about Brock Purdy, George Kittle, Ricky Purcell, and now Fred Warner on the sidelines for a while. But they're 4-2. They're doing something right, so you do got to give them credit. They hung tough the best they can. Mac Jones has played well as you could, but there's just too much firepower for Tampa, especially over there in the Southeast, and that's why Tampa Bay got the win. Right now, a favorite to come out of the NFC. It was Seattle over Jacksonville. Bit of a stunner for me, but this is the epitome of who Trevor Lawrence is. I mean, he played. I mean, just when you think he's ready to turn the corner and show some consistency, he makes a fool out of himself, and he did it again. Basically, the Seattle defense just made life terrible for him. I mean, and pressure in his face. They're a good team, but basically, they're still missing something, even though they're 4-2 right now. I mean, Grant, maybe an emotional letdown after the giant Monday night win over Kansas, which is going to happen because you're playing an AFC favorite, and bringing yourself down to that level. But they were like super flat against the Seattle defense, who's played pretty darn well, especially the defensive front. We're talking about the defensive front who sacked Trevor Lawrence several times, led by DeMarcus Lawrence. And Jackson Smith-Njigba is just absolutely on a tear right now. And if you have him on your fantasy points, kudos. You're getting the fantasy points because that's what you have with Jackson Smith-Njigba, especially yesterday when he had the long touchdown catch. And right now, he's looking like a top 10 receiver in the league, 162 yards. Again, fantasy points, kudos. You got him. A big win for Seattle on the road, especially after the deliberate interception by Sam Darnold to Levante David the week before that cost them the home game against Tampa Bay. They go cross-country to win in Jacksonville. Always a big deal when you can do it cross-country, and that's what Seattle did. Now to what took place yesterday in Green Bay. It was the Packers over the Bengals. I mean, the result shouldn't surprise you. A lot of people say it was closer than people thought. I said, here's the thing with the Green Bay Packers, and I want to say this respectfully. It's just like we see this in all teams, and a Super Bowl favorite, NBA, NFL, whatever. When you play the best of the best, you rise to that level. When you bring yourself down to a level like you're playing at Cincinnati, like they did, and especially before the bye, when they tied with Dallas, you're gonna get the backside of it. And the Green Bay Packers, a lot of things were said, but the thing is, maybe they're not what they're pegged out to be. I mean, I get it. I mean, they went from smashing the Lions week 1, look after the good start, then an embarrassing loss in Cleveland, and then to the tie at Dallas before this. Maybe they're not what we thought they were to be. Jordan Love had an inexcusable interception early in the first quarter, but he managed to pick himself up well and just play a very solid, firm, game-managing type game because they just let Josh Jacobs do all the dirty work because that Bengals defense couldn't stop at a team filled with 11 statues. So that's what you got with this. Everybody's going to make it seem like Cincinnati competed. The game is essentially over in the first half. The only reason why Green Bay didn't do more was because of their own self-inflicted miscues, drop passes, tough incompletions, because really the Bengals defense didn't really show up for the entire game, despite what the score said. I mean, it should have been more than what it was, but because the Jordan Love came off a bye, so too did the Packers. There was something a little missing, but as the game wore on, Jordan Love started to get comfortable, just decided to hand the ball to Josh Jacobs and let him do everything. That's why they managed to get the win. I mean, the game wasn't as close as the score indicated. A lot of people, especially the Bengals fans, the moronic idiots that they are, trying to make it seem like they did something of significance and trying to come back. Green Bay just basically had this game under control. I mean, they could have turned it up anytime they wanted, but they didn't. And that's what essentially comes down to. Granted, Joe Flacco, as he started to get the game going, started to look a little better, not like overly better, but a little better. But the problem was the game was lost in the first half. And especially that bizarre circumstance where the 67-yard field goal was the timeout in the middle of the doink. But it didn't matter. Problem was the game was lost at that point because the Bengals offense couldn't score on a defense filled with 11 statues. I mean, that's how bad that Bengals offense is right now. I mean, a bunch of empty stats per usual, although I'll admit the Jamar Chase touchdown catch is as good as you're going to get. Kudos to that. But at the end of the day, the Green Bay Packers may not be who we thought they were. And we'll find out down the line. I mean, still 5 games in. Yes, they're coming off a bye. I know a lot of Packers fans who aren't happy with how they won because they feel like they should have been able to handle business better than this, which they should have. By the Sarah Law, I thought they were just trolling this entire game. Could have put it away earlier if they wanted to, but they didn't. And Cincinnati, even though they hung around, it wasn't necessarily hung around. It was more or less Green Bay just coasting through the entire game after the early 17-3 lead, where basically the game was over at that point. I mean, they had the kicker get the backup kicker kick the game-clinching field goal to put them up by 9. That was all she wrote. But maybe at the end of the day for Green Bay, we may get a better clue later on when they play some of the stiffer opposition, because this 3-game stretch against Cleveland, Dallas, and Cincinnati, they haven't played all that great. I mean, it cost them against Cleveland because the Cleveland defense has put them on lockdown, and we know how good Cleveland's defense is. But their defense took a vacation against Dallas. Then again, Dak Prescott was just a man amongst boys. Got to give him that. And yesterday at Cincinnati, they just, they could have stepped it up if they wanted to, but they just coasted against the Cincinnati offense, who brought nothing to the table except empty stats and a pair of wide receivers who were grotesquely overpaid. Which leads me to 2 other things before I touch on the Monday night game. Number 1, it was revealed that Trey Hendrickson left the game with a back injury. When you're carrying a mediocre defense, actually, I want to be nice when I call them mediocre, because the mediocre is just taking the high road. When you're carrying a mediocre defense the way this Trey Hendrickson did for the Cincinnati Bengals since he was signed as a free agent in 2020, the physical toll catches up, especially with the physicality of how Trey Hendrickson plays in the NFL. And he did a lot of heavy lifting with that back, and that's why he wound up with the injury. Because I said all along, Trey Hendrickson's the only qualified defensive player on that defensive roster. The other, everybody else on that defensive front can hit the exits, because none of them bring anything to the table. Plain and simple. And Trey Hendrickson had to do all the heavy lifting over the last 2 seasons with the 35 sacks. actually got off to a decent start in the season, until this happened. Now, of course, they have the quick turnaround against Pittsburgh, which I'll touch on when I go to Cincinnati Thursday night. But this is a byproduct of not being able to put together the adequate roster around your franchise defensive end and Trey Hendrickson for the Bengals fans, the Cincinnati media, because when you have that just one guy doing all the heavy lifting, at some point it's going to add up. I mean, you needed 10 other guys to at least do something of significance to help out Trey Hendrickson, and because those 10 guys are not NFL qualified, Trey Hendrickson had to do the heavy lifting since he signed here in 2020, and it looks like it's starting to catch up to him body-wise. I mean, his back is out because he's carried an irrelevant, not just an irrelevant defense, but an irrelevant roster and an irrelevant coaching staff. That's why he's on the side. That's why he had what happened to him yesterday. And you saw what happened to the defense. They plummeted. So that's that issue. The other issue is, once again, this ideology that this what happened as a second half wore on is going to be momentum to what's going to take place Thursday night against Pittsburgh. I'll touch on that when I get to the game Thursday, when I do live my show over there. But what happened today has no bearing on what's going to take place Thursday, because I think the intensity both ways is going to rise a little bit, because one, it's an AFC North clash. We know how AFC North teams just bang it up, especially these two. But I expect to be a clash Thursday night. I mean, it won't be the walkover everyone thinks. It's going to be a clash, because for Pittsburgh, it's a proving point. For Cincinnati, this is basically your season. I mean, you traded Joe Flacco for Joe Flacco. You can see a lot of things about it, but this is your season right here. I mean, I said you was going to be 2-4 going into this game, even with Joe Burrow. You're essentially no better than what I thought you was going to be, because that's what I thought your record was going to be. But you have a chance on a national audience to basically show everything that's said and written about you to be basically nondescript. And you just go out there and steal one. Now, I'm not advocating you're going to win, but I'm not going to say this thing's going to be a rollover, because everybody knows there are still questions about Pittsburgh. I'll divulge into the matchups Thursday night. But what happened in the second half when Green Bay let you come back, because that's what happened. They basically let you come back because they started coasting. That's not going to have a bearing on what's going to take place Thursday night, because you're playing an interconference rival who just coasted, who's basically a Super Bowl, at least a conference favorite in the NFC, to a team who's probably going to have more to prove, because the jury's still out on Pittsburgh. And we know how the AFC North clashes take place. We have two of those teams. And I expect Thursday night to be a clash. And it's going to be a darn good one. I'll be there. My show will be there. I'll do all the previews Thursday night. Now, which brings me to what took place last night in Kansas City. Everybody saw what happened. Well, I'll start with this. First of all, everyone's still complaining about the officiating. Needs to shut up. Okay? If you're complaining, newsflash, shut up. If you're complaining about the officiating on that one, you're a moron. Because the Detroit Lions had ample opportunities to win the game, despite your views of officiating, and they only hang 17 points. And they just hung 31 in Cincinnati, and they just a couple weeks before hung 52 against Chicago. They go to Kansas City against a Kansas City team who basically had some areas scratching their heads after what happened in Jacksonville, especially after the pick 6 by Devin Lloyd. And there's some people who thought Detroit, who was pegged as a favorite to win this game. Kansas' defense just manned up, stepped up, and shut the offense down. And they deserve all the credit for it. It's plain and simple. And Patrick Mahomes looked like the Patrick Mahomes MVP form in this game. And, of course, the clincher was the rushing touchdown. Really, the clincher was taking advantage of the end of the first half where they scored a touchdown, and you received the ball in the second half, and you scored a touchdown to start the second half. That was essentially the ball game. Not because some referees missed calls, because, what happens with Chiefs haters, the number one thing is, why did this trade did the referees help the Chiefs again? No, the referees didn't help the Chiefs, because the Detroit Lions just self-destructed, and we know what that led to, which was the sucker punch by Brian Branch on Juju Smith-Schuster in one of the most disgusting acts you'll ever see. And kudos to Dan Campbell for one thing. He came out and basically said, I'm not tolerating it. And he did at the press conference. He said he loves Brian Branch. He stuck up for his man, but he didn't tolerate the action. That's what a head coach should do, and Dan Campbell deserves kudos for that. Of course, he got the 1-game suspension. Everyone's saying the whole thing is too harsh. No, it's too soft. I mean, why would you take a cheap shot like that in an inexcusable situation when we had 60 minutes to do something on the field, and you got roasted, especially on the Patrick Mahomes touchdown run, where it was you that Mahomes was aiming for with a flex of the post. So don't even try me with the referees. Don't even try me about the suspension, because 1 game was too soft for this. I mean, it was an actual cheap shot. It was unnecessary, and it was unprofessional by Brian Branch. And it's a kudos to Dan Campbell to basically condemn the act, because that's what he did. Now for the Kansas City Chiefs moving forward. Look out, because guess who's coming? Guess who's officially back? Rashee Rice. I mean, you already have Xavier Worthy. You have Hollywood Brown, and he developed a nice repertoire with Tyquan Thornton. And I said Mahomes was going to go scorched earth this season, and I have itchy's going to starting Sunday against the Raiders. And everyone better fasten their seatbelts, because it's coming. I mean, I said before the season started, they're still the team to beat in the AFC. Even when they got off to the 0-2 start, even after the loss of Jacksonville, where after the pick 6, they just fell off the map, they picked themselves out, got 2 statement wins in 3 weeks against Baltimore and Detroit. They're here to stay. They might just run the table moving forward. They're going to be a problem. As long as they have their foundation, they're going to be a problem. No, the refs won't have anything to do about it. If your team's not good enough to beat the Chiefs, don't point the finger at the refs. Point the finger at your team, because they're not good enough. Because I have an itch. They're going to be having making a trip to San Francisco in February. So that takes care of some of that. And today we're going to relive the arguably at the time the most one-sided trade in NFL history. This was the infamous Dallas Cowboys, Minnesota Vikings, Herschel Walker deal. This was the Cowboys sending Herschel Walker to the Minnesota Vikings. It recruited a boatload of draft picks that started their dynasty in the 90s. 2 of those draft picks was running back Emmitt Smith and Pro Bowler Darren Woodson, 2 guys in the Hall of Fame. Party is over with that point. Now, the misconception of this is this was a Jerry Jones trade. This trade was done in spite of Jerry Jones, because Jimmy Johnson knew maybe that time was coming for Herschel Walker. They wanted value, and they wanted to fleece someone for draft capital, and they did that with this trade. It would turn out to be 3 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks, among many others. It was a move that led to that started a big chunk of that Dallas dynasty that went back-to-back, actually won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, the first 2 under Jimmy Johnson, and we know what Jerry Jones did after that. Maybe one of the, depends on the angle of it, one of the 5 most lopsided trades in sports history. Some people call this the worst in NFL history. The Deshaun Watson trade between Cleveland and Houston trumped that by a landslide. But when you think about what this did, Jimmy Johnson just basically just played the Minnesota Vikings and spun it off to arguably one of the great runs in NFL history. We talk about the early to mid-90s Cowboys, 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. That's exactly what took place. Basically, the real, according to everyone, the real currency was the draft picks that Dallas got, because the rest of it is at that point. And we've had some lopsided trades in recent years in all sports. The Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis in the NBA. Of course, we talked about Deshaun Watson for all that ridiculous draft capital that Cleveland forked out, which included a $230 million fully guaranteed contract that just went down the tubes in Cleveland. And you add, and of course, maybe another one in recent years was the whole fiasco with the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears, where Carolina just forked out an unquestionable amount of draft capital to land the number 1 pick, which was Bryce Young, and eventually shipped out Christian McCaffrey for draft capital, which hasn't even panned out yet. So that's some of the lopsided trades we had in all of sports. I could talk about many others. Of course, 2008, the Pau Gasol trade from Memphis to the Lakers. A lot of conspiracy theories. We talk about Jerry West, who was the executive VP of basketball operations for Memphis, of course, known as Mr. Laker. There was always kinds of conspiracies there. But maybe before the Watson trade, this was probably the most lopsided and probably the worst in NFL history. We consider what it was Minnesota just forked out to get Herschel Walker, and it just was egg on their face because they didn't do anything other than that. They started the building of the Dallas dynasty. We know what happened there. And that's why this might have the distinction of the worst trade in NFL history. As I said, the Deshaun Watson trade trumps it by a mile for a boatload of reasons, which includes a fully guaranteed contract, which set off a lot of fireworks with the Players Association afterward, which was revealed, just several months back. But, that's what you get. I mean, if there's got to be a giver, there's got to be a taker. Depends what you're going to give and what you're going to take. That's what it comes down to with that. I mean, still a top 5 most lopsided transaction trade-wise in NFL history. And probably right behind the Watson. This one, the Herschel Walker trade, behind the Deshaun Watson fiasco. And we know what happened with that one. Same thing happened here. The only difference is Minnesota was smart not to give Herschel Walker the fully guaranteed contract that Cleveland was stupid enough to give to Deshaun Watson. That's the biggest difference. Everyone's going to have their opinions with the trades, win or loss. Now to the world of boxing. And before we talk about some of the upcomings, be remiss if I talk about the sad news that took place late Saturday night. It was the passing of one of the premier analysts on Free TV Network, when Free TV Network was the apex of the sport, the great Alex Wallau. Many years, he introduced ABC to a fella named Jim Lampley. And we know what Jim Lampley became when he went to HBO from ABC. It was Alex Wallau who brought him into the forefront, calling the super early fights of Mike Tyson's career. Most notably, the 30-second obliteration of Marvis Frazier, among some of the fights those two called. And of course, later, Dan Dierdorf, the longtime broadcaster, the one-time NFL player, did play-by-play with Wallau for ABC Sports, and at times the great Al Michaels did. One of the all-time brilliant analysts who told you the truth to your face, whether you liked it or not. He was the one that revealed all the crookedness in the Don King product for the longest time. It was a victim of death threats. He was the one that openly called a James Toney decision win over Dave Tiberi, discussing to the face of James Toney, because everyone with a brain knows Dave Tiberi was the right winner. Should have been the right winner. He had a great opinion on the ABC replay of the Julio Cesar Chavez Mildred Taylor stoppage. I mean, you agree or disagree or what, but his view was spot on how maybe he thought Steele should have handled it. And we know how that has divided the boxing community. And we know how he handled the face-to-face interview in '89 with Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield as they were popping up for their super fight when that build-up began. One of the all-time brilliant minds, one of the guys who knew how to call a fight, one of the guys who was very articulate and knowledgeable of the sport. And when network TV was the apex of the sport, they were talking about NBC, CBS, and ABC. Alex Wallau was one of the voices of it. And maybe the real spearhead, when it really began, was when he and Jim Lampley called the Mike Tyson-Marvis Frazier fight the 30-second obliteration, which we know the uppercut that bent Marvis Frazier backwards. And even Jim Lampley said, I don't know. I asked Alex Wallau, what was I getting myself into? Because, of course, before that, I should add, it was a Mike Tyson-Jesse Ferguson fight, the infamous nose into the brain fight. Mike Tyson fans knows a quote on that one. But Alex Wallau, deep knowledge in the sport of boxing, one of the premier analysts, very articulate, very detail-oriented, who knew the ins and outs just as well as anyone. Whenever he saw something he didn't like, he called it out, most notably the Don King politics and the James Toney Dave Tiberi decision, which he called disgusting to the face of James Toney and made no apologies for it. And that's what the legacy of Alex Wallau was when he was behind the mic on ABC's Wide World of Sports. A terrible loss for the boxing community. And really, for the longest time, he couldn't get any gigs, largely because he spoke views in the political sense of the fight game that rubbed off the boxing intelligentsia the wrong way at times. And I thought he should have landed a gig at one of the premium networks like HBO or Showtime. He would have been great for that. But Not only that, he also became an exec for ABC Sports after ABC's tenure with boxing started to dwindle down when we went to the premium networks and pay-per-view. But a brilliant mind of the fight game was Alex Wallau. Sad day for the fight community. May God rest his soul. A lot of brilliant minds in the fight game going. A lot of brilliant minds. Now we touch on what took place Saturday night in Philadelphia. It was Boots Ennis with a one-round obliteration of Uisma Lima to win a fake super welterweight championship. This thing's all over the place. Let's get out of the way. This thing's all over the place. We know this. He did what he was supposed to do, was get the guy out of there in one round. Nothing more, nothing less. If he went past one round, it's basically a loss for, technically a loss for Ennis. But he was supposed to get him out of there in one round, and he did just that. At the face-off, I saw Lima's face. He even looked overwhelmed at the stare down, and even Boots Ennis knew it. Boots Ennis capitalized on it and sent him out the door. Now, of course, everyone's going to have their opinion on him and his career and his resume up to this point. I get it. He did beat Stanionis a couple fights ago. With Stanionis' no pushover, Boots Ennis just took him to the cleaners. And had a couple wins, subpar, not great. But he did have this Saturday night. But it was a case of just him doing what he was supposed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. Anything more than any fight. If this fight went past the first round, it was technically a loss for Ennis. That's how one-sided this fight was. Just him getting a first-round knockout was all he's supposed to do. Some people say he made a statement. What is that statement? What is the statement? That he did what he was supposed to do? Pretty much. I'll give him his due. He was impressive in how he did it. But does it mean anything at the end of the day? More than likely not. Because we know the fight everyone wants to see. That's Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz. That's the fight that matters right now. The only fight that matters. And that better happen within the next 6 months, or there's going to be a lot of questions that have to be answered. Because we know Boots Ennis ducked it once. Virgil Ortiz called it out again. And now Boots Ennis was starting to call fighters out Saturday night. Only fight that makes sense right now is Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz. You can forget Terrence Crawford because Crawford's already had bigger fish to fry after what he did a month ago. But the fight that has to be made right here, right now, and it has to be made within the next 6 months. Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz. Now, who would win that fight? I'll say one thing. We haven't seen Boots Ennis pushed. We saw Virgil Ortiz pushed in his last 2 fights by Sergey Bulachuk and Israel Madrimov. And he had to get to the well and find ways to win rounds in close competitive fights. Does that mean he's going to beat Boots Ennis? Who knows? Does it mean he has the edge? Maybe. Because we haven't seen Boots Ennis pushed. We've seen Virgil Ortiz pushed. Because remember, he was knocking everybody out before his last 2 fights when Bulachuk and Madrimov took him the distance. We're going to find out how good Boots Ennis can be if he goes through with this fight. Because we know Virgil Ortiz is just as hot of a young star as Boots Ennis is. That's the fight to make right now. There's no excuses for that fight not to be made, and it better be made within the next 6 months. Because other than that, you might as well forget about it. I'd like to see something like that once again, because this was the big thing. There's no reason to marinate it. There's no reason to string it out. There's no reason to draw it out. Make the fight happen. Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz. You don't need to do more building up. You don't need to marinate it. Everyone's already salivating for it, and that's a fight that needs to be made, and it needs to be made within the next 6 months. Period. Now I touched on the historical aspect of the sport today. This was 76 years ago today at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, California. It was the heavyweight champion and Cincinnati icon Ezzard Charles facing one of the tough, durable, guys with the looks back in those days, Pat Valentino. The Charles story I've touched on many times. I'll get to that here in a second. But when you talk about Pat Valentino, a guy who was in the military for a while himself, he basically, before that, he was known to lose a tough decision to one of the standout all-time great one-time future heavyweight champ Jimmy Bivens, underrated fighter who's as good as anyone. Basically known for good looks, put together a nice winning streak. Basically, he fought a fighter named Turkey Thompson for the California State heavyweight title. and won a close decision. Rise himself up to the rankings, but he had a retina tear that sidelined him for the end of throughout most of the 1949 calendar year. Now we enter Ezzard Charles, who was a year removed from having 2 wins over Jersey Joe Walcott, and now he's making the second defense of his heavyweight title in the backyard of Pat Valentino, in front of a sellout crowd of 19,000 at the Cow Palace. Remember, this is the first title fight since Jack Johnson. Back up. This was the first heavyweight title fight since Jack Johnson KO'd Stanley Ketchel in 1909, which is exactly 40 years to the day when this happened. And this was basically Charles was a sizable favorite. A gate of $170,000, which was a big deal back in 1949. $170,000 probably pays to several million today. We consider the value of the dollar in today's financial climate. Valentino earned a flat $5,000, which was a big deal for him back then. Ezzard Charles, of course, $40,000. We talk about this fight, maybe a category for 1949 fight of the year, and it was as good as it got because Valentino and his style, a very aggressive fighter, came out early, and when he came out early, he was getting Ezzard Charles a clinch as he was coming in. And he built a little bit of a lead in the first 2 to 3 rounds. And at the end of the second and early third round, both guys started to exchange punches, and it was a pretty darn good one. Started a good fight. But the counter right hand of Ezzard Charles took over as rounds 4 and 5 started to take over. And now with his old school shoulder roll defensive style, he was starting to make Valentino miss and making Valentino pay with a counter right hand. And it looked like he was ready to control the fight. But Valentino comes out, puts together the combination that stuns Charles to start the round 6. And it looked like Valentino might have stopped the momentum a little bit. But as round 7 and 8 went on, the skill level of Ezzard Charles showed when he basically just showed his advanced skill and why he was the reigning heavyweight champion. And of course, in the middle of the 8th round, it was the left-right combination that floored Valentino. Looked like he fell more of fatigue versus hurt because his legs looked like he just slowly went out from underneath them like you would as you would go laying down on a couch. That's what happened to Valentino when that left-right combination by Ezzard Charles hit him. And he basically, his legs were so heavy he couldn't even get up. And at that point, the fight was stopped. And a terrific back and forth fight where both fighters had their moments. Ezzard Charles retains the heavyweight championship on a 8th round knockout over the tough, durable, and solid fighter in Pat Valentino. I mean, Valentino was a case of a fighter who had the looks and basically was a very good fighter. After this fight, he was offered an exhibition to go to fight Joe Louis, and even though after everything that took place never went through, but and eventually it did wind up happening because for a minute he couldn't get over how Ezzard Charles beat him, and then we finally had an exhibition with Joe Louis with a crowd of 5,800 people. It was basically, it wasn't like the exhibitions we see today where it was old geezers making fools of themselves. It was the 2 guys here just having fun, which is what Valentino and Louis did. Both made a light profit off of it. And basically just had a good time. But Valentino's moment, he had it, but the skill level of Ezzard Charles took over, and that's why Ezzard Charles won on an 8th round TKO. Just a standout fighter. And we talk about, as always, with Ezzard Charles, the distinction of the greatest light heavyweight, and he never fought for a title in that division because there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, I could detail it, but I'm not going to cross sensitive barriers because it involves sensitive barriers. But the distinction of the greatest light heavyweight, and we think about the guys that stand out in that weight class, Archie Moore, Billy Conn, who some call Conn might have had the greater prime of every of those light heavyweights. Guys like Bob Foster, Michael Spinks, Tiger Flowers, Jimmy Bivens, Tommy Loughran, among many others. Tiger Flowers. Eventually, a guy like Charlie Burley was up there. Of course, Joey Maxim, who held a light heavyweight title and got a win over Sugar Ray Robinson. But all of those, the consensus, and I'll have to go with it, is that Ezzard Charles has a distinction of the greatest light heavyweight of all time. I mean, maybe not the greatest prime, like a Billy Conn or maybe even a Bob Foster would have, but wasn't far behind it. But his prime spanned longer than the others. And we talk about what he did during that time. I mean, he beat Archie Moore 3 times, so he gets the nod over Archie Moore. Beat Jimmy Bivens multiple times, Charlie Burley. And Charlie Burley was a guy nobody wanted to fight because of style. That alone puts Ezzard Charles in that distinction of the greatest light heavyweight of all time. I mean, the reason why he didn't fight for the title was there's a boatload of reasons for it. I mean, I could detail it, but it involves sensitive barriers. But that's the legacy of Ezzard Charles. Probably the greatest light heavyweight ever. Of course, ventured up to heavyweight to have the 2 wins over Jersey Joe Walcott. What took place 76 years ago in San Francisco when he beat Pat Valentino. And of course, a fight in 1950 against Joe Louis about a year later, and a fight that really, the only reason why it took place was because Joe Louis wasn't dead and the IRS was after him. And everybody knows that fight shouldn't have taken place. But it was a fight Ezzard Charles needed because nobody recognized Charles as a champ because Joe Louis retired. And for Charles to have the recognition as a champ at the time, he needed Joe Louis and beat him, granted under sad circumstances. But you can't deny Ezzard Charles' greatness. I mean, and his run of heavyweight was very solid too. I mean, talk about the 2 wins over Walcott, Valentino. He beat Gus Lasenovich, who was a light heavyweight champ, challenging him for the heavyweight title. Remember, it was Lasenovich who was a champ and Charles was a #1 contender. And for reasons, they couldn't agree on a deal. So Charles goes a heavyweight, the 2 wins over Walcott, Valentino, Lasenovich, of course, Joe Louis, before losing the 3rd and 4th fights to Walcott. In the end game, the 2 fights against Rocky Marciano were both fights he gave Rocky Marciano all he can handle and then some. Actually, the only fighter in Rocky Marciano's reign as the heavyweight champ to go the 15-round distance. That's the legacy of Ezzard Charles in the ring. When you talk about his legacy in the Cincinnati community and the Cincinnati icons, still #1. I mean, like I say, the road, the mural, the statue. And I tell you, if you guys are out there in Cincinnati by TQL Stadium, you can't miss that mural. I mean, the sucker's like 2 miles long and 3 miles high. I mean, that's like one of the biggest murals you'll ever see. That's the Ezzard Charles mural. And of course, the park. And of course, they do dedications every year to the great Ezzard Charles, which is a wonderful thing. Remember, 2022, it was Eden something Park. Later, it was changed to Ezzard Charles Park due to a unanimous ruling by members of the volunteer committee for Cincy Parks at the time. And we talk about among the Cincinnati icons. Well, the list is short, but it's quite high. Well, Ezzard Charles is #1. That's a no-brainer. I said all the accolades for him. Right behind him, Oscar Robertson. You know, the UC standout. First player to average a triple-double in NBA history. Talk about all-around players. One of the premier all-around players of his time, and did it with a beauty, grace, and elegance like none other in basketball history. Playing for the Cincinnati Royals, which is now the NBA Sacramento Kings. And, you know, the only first player to average a triple-double in boxing history. And we talk about his place in history among Cincinnati icons, definitely up there. Because you don't go the parts of the University of Cincinnati without listening or reading about the name Oscar Robertson. So he's a Cincinnati icon also, just like Ezzard Charles. We see in the fight game, Ezzard Charles's eventual counterpart, who was in the fight game in the 70s, Aaron Pryor. I mean, probably the greatest junior welterweight of all time. Packed Riverfront Coliseum whenever he fought, because he was, since at the time, Cincinnati sports at a time when the Big Red Machine was running wild. I mean, he packed Riverfront Stadium as much as the Reds packed Crosley Field and Riverfront Stadium. That's what Aaron Pryor was. Of course, catapulted to the abomination of Antonio Cervantes to win the title in Cincinnati in front of the crowd that just almost blew off the roof of that particular Coliseum. That's Aaron Pryor. So Aaron Pryor is a Cincinnati icon. I touched on the Big Red Machine. 2 guys stand out. Johnny Bench, the premier catcher. The career accolades speak for itself. Arguably the distinction of the greatest catcher in baseball history. MVP of the 1976 World Series when he basically just took the team and won it back-to-back in the second of that Big Red Machine. He's definitely a Cincinnati icon with all the accolades. Actually, if you go to the Reds Hall of Fame here in Cincinnati, there's a section made for Johnny Bench, and you can't miss it. I mean, his plaque, his box has every freaking accomplishment he had. And maybe that's why he had the distinction of the greatest catcher of all time. Of course, subject to opinion for many reasons. But if I held me to it, Johnny Bench has that distinction. His teammate of the Big Red Machine years, Joe Morgan, the spark plug, the energy that kept him going, the premier second baseman at the time. Some would say the greatest second baseman of all time. Although a guy like Rogers Hornsby might have something to say about that. But Joe Morgan, listen to interviews with Johnny Bench after Joe Morgan's passing. Johnny Bench summed up Joe Morgan perfectly. The guy was the energizer, the spark plug that got us going, especially during the 1975 World Series, the first of the two they won. And we're not talking about the Big Red Machine going back-to-back without Joe Morgan. Because it was his timely hits in a couple of the games against the Boston Red Sox in the 75 World Series that got him to come back and win that World Series, especially Game 7 in Fenway Park. And Joe Morgan was just a spark plug. And, of course, his legacy carried over to the booth where he and John Miller ruled the roost for the ESPN Sunday Night Baseball when it was worth watching the sport of baseball. And Joe Morgan was as good as anyone behind the mic. But as a player, a Cincinnati icon, and the day that was attributed to Joe Morgan, and of course it's always August 8th, because he wore the number 8. Let's just say the icon status of the great Joe Morgan. And without Joe Morgan, there's no back-to-back World Series. Ask Johnny Bench, he'll tell you that. And Johnny Bench has more credibility than anyone in the Cincinnati community. So Johnny Bench and Joe Morgan, two Cincinnati icons. You want to stay in the baseball field? Barry Larkin came out of nowhere to help the Reds win the World Series in 1990 against that machine, the Oakland A's, when they brought the brooms to swept him out. And of course, the 1995 National League MVP led him to the National League Championship Series where they lost to the eventual World Series champ Atlanta Braves. But for that period, you could probably say the premier shortstop in all of baseball when he was, this is before guys like Derek Jeter, Nomar Garciaparra, Alex Rodriguez, among others came around. It was Barry Larkin, who was one of the premier shortstops of that era. You could probably say the best of that era. Actually, the year after he won the MVP, you could probably say he had a better year in 96 than he did in 95 when he won it. That's the legacy of Barry Larkin. I mean, he's a Cincinnati icon, has a street named after him, still does work for the Reds, especially when it comes to the commentary gig. I know some people aren't pleased with him telling the truth, but that's Cincinnati sports fans. What do you expect? Barry Larkin is a Cincinnati icon. Of course, here in the NFL, we talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. Two of them, and they're no-brainers. Anthony Munoz, the first NFL player to go to the Hall of Fame as a member of the Cincinnati Bengals, arguably the distinction of the greatest left tackle in NFL history. Wasn't a physical specimen, but was about technique, foot positioning, hand positioning, just getting to the right spots to make sure Ken Anderson and Boomer Esiason was protected on their blind side. And Anthony Munoz was as good as anyone at that left tackle position, and he was the first Bengal to go to the Hall of Fame. His charity work over here in Cincinnati, second to none. Arguably the greatest Bengal in the history of the franchise. First one to ever go to the Hall of Fame. He's a Cincinnati icon. And as I said, his quarterback he protected for many years, Ken Anderson, who arguably should be in the Hall of Fame. A lot of reasons for it. It's up to you for the Bengals fans to decide that one. But just like Anthony Munoz, played a game with elegance and grace at the quarterback position. No one's going to say he was the greatest thing the quarterback position had, but was very darn good during his time and led the Bengals to the 1981 Super Bowl where they almost came back to the eventually fall to the San Francisco 49ers. But like Munoz, Anderson has a Cincinnati Foundation, among many other things. And that's what Ken Anderson was. And the capper was probably a more recent one, Luciano Lucho Acosta when he was here. Part of FC Cincinnati. You can have your Reds and Bengals fans all you want, and we know how much of a two-faced they are. But when Luciano Acosta filled TQL Stadium when he was here during that 3-year period and took FC Cincinnati to newer heights, especially we talk about winning that Supporters Shield in 2023 where he was named the most valuable player of that league, that's the legacy Lucho Acosta had. I always talk about with soccer fans, and this is true with him, especially when he was here at FC Cincinnati, because they had a pretty darn good team on top of it. The electricity from the fans to the players and vice versa, especially Luciano Lucho Acosta, it rubbed off on one another, and it was a thing of beauty. And it was wonderful to see. I was privileged to be a part of it, and he certainly was a delight to watch because he played, as if every game was going to be his last. And because of how he played, and because of the energy he brought to TQL Stadium to FC Cincinnati, Luciano Lucho Acosta was a Cincinnati icon. Ezzard Charles, Oscar Robertson, Aaron Pryor, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Barry Larkin, Anthony Munoz, Ken Anderson, and Luciano Acosta, those are the Cincinnati icons. And their legacies will always be in Cincinnati forever and ever and ever. Nobody even comes close. A lot more within the range, but that's the tip of the iceberg, the guys I just mentioned. And that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. I will be back tomorrow night. For those of you who missed this particular show tonight or the ones we have done in the past, you can catch the replays, the audio versions on the Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio apps, as well as the video version of the Spotify app. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. You take care of yourself first before you take care of anything else. If you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else is going to matter because you got to focus on you and you first. Because if you do take care of yourself first and focus on you, all the good things will follow. On that note, have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and I will see you tomorrow.